Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another week of Washed Up Weekly. I'm Abby, and this is Colin, and we are your co-hosts. A lot has happened this week, but before we jump into our topics, we just wanted to touch base with our 11 subscribers and each other about how we've been doing with the podcast. We also launched our Instagram at Washed Up Weekly and have been experimenting on that side of things, which I think has been fun. Colin, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, we got some reels posted on our Instagram. It's the first time I've ever actually made a reel because, as our listeners know, I've never been on TikTok. But Instagram seems to have really taken to reels. And so I made some of those. And then also, we posted those to YouTube today for like the shorts section. And it was kind of funny. One of them was getting quite a bit of traction right out of the gate. And so that was interesting. Like, just seeing the view count keep going up, and I don't even know what about it really caught people's attention, but it seems like shorts are really popular right now.
Yes. The shorts I've never really even interacted with. So Colin texted me and I didn't even realize it was like a real thing. I mean, I knew it was a thing, but I just didn't know how many new people we could reach with it. So I'm excited to see us grow through that in that regard. Our Instagram has 5 followers too. So thank you guys for following.
It seems like shorts is a good way to reach new audiences, like people who just might be scrolling through, haven't heard of our channel or anything like this. But yeah, hopefully we can keep it going. And today is actually Groundhog's Day that we're recording, so just wanted to give that a little shout out. The groundhog did see his shadow, so I guess 6 more weeks of winter. How
I
do you
was
feel
gonna
about
say,
that?
isn't that like, yeah, I saw that too. I'm upset about it just because it gets so dark. As you guys know, Colin and I both work a 9 to 5 as well as this podcast. And when I get off of work, it is so dark, so dark. And this is much more fun for me. More challenging, more creative, more fun.
Yeah, for sure. And I was just thinking about the movie Groundhog's Day today, which is actually one of my like all-time favorite movies. Partially because I think the main character, have you seen that movie?
No,
This
I actually haven't. I've seen different variations of the concept, but I have never seen that specific one.
It's pretty funny, especially because he's like a weather reporter, so I feel like I can relate to him a little bit. He's like this very kind of like cynical, I feel like he's like washed up in his own way with the media. And he kind of like finds his mojo again after, like reliving the same day over and over. So there's some parallels there, I feel like, with us finding our mojo and figuring out this channel and everything. And that kind of leads me to wanted to also touch base and continue talking about the independent media thing that we're trying out. And what have we learned so far, just being in that lane?
Things that I've learned personally is how much dedication goes into it, I want to say. I feel like last week we talked a lot about accountability within the beginning part of the episode in terms of keeping up with the news and making sure you know what you're talking about before going on. And I think it's the same for me again this week. Plus, just scheduling too has kind of been difficult sometimes. Colin and I are both on opposite sides of the country, so we're 3 hours apart. So sometimes it's a little later for Colin versus me. And so thanks for staying up for this. What else have we learned?
Well, I was sharing with you earlier this week, but I tried to go see RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearing, which happened on Wednesday. And I kind of ran into some obstacles with that because I made it like to the Senate building where they were having it, got inside, everything was fine, but there was a super, super long line. And if anyone has been reading my Substack, you might notice this trend of I feel like all the stories I've been writing lately are just me standing in really long lines waiting to get in places. And it kind of like brought it to my awareness how in the independent lane, like you don't really have the same access that a lot of like legacy outlets have. And it was just kind of reiterated to me, realizing like I wasn't going to get into this hearing no matter how bad I wanted to, and there was too many people in line. So I actually just left and was like, okay, I'll watch it later on the recording or the live stream or something like this. So it wasn't like a big deal. Like I had other things to do anyway, but I did want to go see it. So it was a little bit disappointing and just reminding me that in as much as we've talked about legacy media being on its way out, it's not quite dead yet. I would say it's more like in hospice care and probably has couple months, several months to maybe even a year or so, a couple years left to live. But for now, we'll just keep doing our independent thing. And also, actually, though, the White House press briefings have started again. They have a new press secretary, Caroline Levitt, and she and other people in the administration had made mention of independent media and the traction that it's been getting, and even talked about having independent journalists attend some of the press briefings and whatnot. So if that does become something in the future, we'll certainly see what we can do. But
Yeah.
for now, legacy is still very much a thing, even though a lot of people agree it's heading on its way out.
Yes, I'm wondering how popular we have to get to be able to get our own press passes and stuff when it comes to independent commentators getting in on that scene. So I'd be excited to do things like that. I think the independent scene, again, like we've been saying, is definitely on the rise, but I'm glad that we are able to call out that it's not completely, or the like that legacy media is not completely dead there. I do want to bring up, as Colin and I were talking about earlier, about how we kind of want to be candid with our process and transition from being ex-college journalists to now doing this independent media thing, and some concerns or problems that I think I'm having with this transition is honestly just sticking to my opinion and owning it, and also eliminating the fear that comes with maybe outside people commenting on things or on my opinion when that is how I feel, if that makes sense. Like, I want to be able to own my opinion to the fullest because it is how I feel, but I know that I need to grow thicker skin to be able to receive criticism because it is right that people are able to criticize that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to when we were talking about how the shorts are really popular right now. That's in one way that's really exciting because it gives us opportunities to put our stuff out there, but in another way it's a little bit scary and intimidating because people might see the short and take something out of context and not really understand the full nuances of what your opinion actually is. And then it's like they feel free license to, like make a quick remark thinking that we'll probably never see it. It doesn't even have an impact, but um we certainly know from like our time even in college media that we very much do like see all a lot of the comments that we get. At some point, I'm sure we'll just kind of learn to tune it out. But yeah, that was something we've been like trying to get better at and learn how to do. But it's not like a easy thing to just tune out, you know.
Yeah, I think I need to learn more how to tune that part out as well. Not that we got that much hate within the Vista or anything like that, but I always used to
Speak for
think,
yourself.
never mind, I'm literally remembering the comment that was left on an article that Colin wrote.
I believe it
But
said whoever wrote this has shit for brains was
yeah,
what I remember. But that's the point. Like I do remember that comment, but it's just like it doesn't add anything to my life to be floating around in my brain. So eventually it'll dissipate.
and eventually too, Colin and I were also discussing how at one point our personal lives and this side of our lives will probably cross over a little bit or a lot of it. I don't know, depending on how successful or how long we keep up with this. But we also have to kind of accept that as well. Right now, it's so like separate, but once we start advertising it, within the next month or so, I can predict that people outside just our close circle will have more opinions about what we're saying or about what we think.
Yeah. So we'll do all that we can to prepare ourselves for that time, but for now, it's just us and our 11 subscribers.
Yes. I
And we appreciate you all. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, I texted Colin when he hit 10 subscribers and I was like, double digits, yay. So fun little washed up community right now.
Okay, so I think we can probably get started with our topics for this week. Starting off with a pretty serious one. Um, I'm sure everyone's heard about the plane crash that happened in DC. It was American Airlines Flight 5342. There were 64 people on board. It crashed into a helicopter over the Potomac River, and everyone on board died. Um, this was the first U.S. commercial airplane disaster since 2009 where everyone on board died, and it was one of the largest since 9/11. So a lot to work with on that topic, but did you have any thoughts about that?
Initially, when I first saw it, I just remember thinking to myself how crazy, sad, and tragic it all was for sure. And then doing more research into it, I've been seeing different coverage and different reasonings for why the plane crash happened. There was the reasoning for like I know that Trump was talking a lot about DEI being the reason for it, and then there was people saying that there was broken protocol, which is what happened. And I think that there's not just one sole reason for it happening, but more so all of these reasons together. But we can get into more of that too. Colin, you can.
Yeah, exactly. I think that anytime a tragedy happens like this, people want to like know what the answer is so that it doesn't happen again. And I think that that's a very real impulse, but also it can lead to a lot of like finger pointing and blame. And we saw this with the LA fires as well, where there just wasn't a lot of room for nuance. And again, I think a lot of things have to go wrong together in the same moment for something like this to happen. And so my approach is generally to kind of like take a step back and wait for more information to emerge. Um, so yeah, I mean, you had mentioned that DEI was brought up by Trump. Um, there's also people said that the helicopter was flying about 100 feet too high. It should have been lower. The DC airspace is very, very busy all the time. And apparently also the air traffic control people had gone down a person. They were supposed to have two people, one watching the airplane traffic and the other the helicopter. But for some reason, about an hour before this crash occurred, one of them left, and who knows? I think I heard that they were allowed to leave by like the supervisor,
I heard that too.
but they were down to one person doing all of the management of this really complicated airspace. So yeah, it makes sense why accidents like this sometimes are the case, but they shouldn't be, you know, we shouldn't just accept it. It's horrific. And obviously, this shouldn't become normalized in any way, even though unfortunately it's felt like that this week with multiple plane crashes happening.
I think obviously in everyday life and in jobs, human error always happens. But in a job like this or this situation, I it's really hard because you just don't have room for human error when safety and lives are or could be at risk, right? Like that's really unfortunate and horribly tragic that this happened and that some people are kind of only blaming one reason again, like how we were just talking about. It's honestly just a buildup of all of these things. And people need to kind of see the whole photo, the whole picture to understand what and why things went wrong and how we could in the future prevent something like this from happening too.
Yeah, and it's probably worthwhile to mention a couple of the stories that we've heard from the victims of people who died. I know that the plane was coming from Wichita to DC, and it was carrying a lot of people from the figure skating club of Boston, and a lot of them were coming back from a competition. They were mostly young people who were training to like someday be in the Olympics. And obviously, it just kind of hammers home the loss of not like the life, but the potential that all these people had, the futures that they were looking forward to. There was one woman I heard, not part of the figure skating group, but had changed her flight to make it home earlier for her birthday so that she could celebrate it with her partner. And I mean, it's horrible that this happened, and a lot of them too. I heard there was a professor from Howard, a lot of lawyers were there. It's really kind of hard to fathom. And in DC, it's definitely been a big conversation happening. People like at work, for instance, are bringing it up, just kind of trying to learn as much as we can about it.
Yeah, it's definitely been talked about so much at the country. I can't even imagine the energy or the shift there in DC of how people are touching on it there too. And Colin, you're so close to it. And for me, when I saw the news too, I'm a very squeamish person, so I couldn't really watch any videos or anything like that. I know there were some, I think there were some videos, right, of bodies or of the crash itself. I'm very superstitious when it comes to those things too. I don't like to see it. I fly a lot, honestly. But I don't really like to look at things like that. But obviously we're talking about this right now because it's really important.
Yeah, I'm also a really nervous flyer, so anytime something like this happens, it kind of freaks me out a bit. But luckily, it is pretty rare historically and recently speaking. And it kind of made me more aware of the fact that this is such a big news story because it is rare and it should be rare, and hopefully it will continue to be rare. Um, but yeah, I was gonna add like about the mood in DC. I would say people in DC are not very sentimental people. Everyone's just kind of like has their eyes on whatever their goals are, and they're very like driven and directed. But even like in the Washington Post, they did really, I thought, heartfelt and touching features on some of the people who died, and I thought. I was obviously I live in DC, but I didn't really have that much proximity to any of it. I was asleep when the crash happened. I woke up, saw the headline, read a bit about it, and that was it for like right after it happened. And then I did go running down by sort of the Potomac area, and it crossed my mind that they had spent that whole day taking the bodies out of the river. And I didn't actually see any of this, but again, it just is like terrible. It's really, really tragic. So yeah, I
Right.
think
Oh,
sorry. I just think that sometimes like again the rush to like figure out the reason why is kind of a bit of a deflection from the horrific reality of it. Like people, no one wants to like sit with that and feel all of the intensity of like 70, almost 70 people just instantly dying. But sometimes I think we do have to like give ourselves that space to think about and reflect on and feel those things.
right. And with all of the reasons behind, or the possible reasons behind the plane crash coming to light too, I feel that a lot of people have been talking about it and making conspiracy theories and discussing what happened online as well. When Trump specifically was talking about kind of the DEI blaming reason, I think. obviously with jobs like this, I do think that merit is definitely should be prioritized. I think that a lot of people within these roles need to be qualified, and it doesn't by just the story alone, it just doesn't seem like to me that there's enough qualified people within the job because if it's breaking protocol to have the air traffic controller combine duties of keeping track of both just doesn't seem like obviously it doesn't seem like something that should be happening if there is room for human error there. And with that, I also think that Trump blaming it solely on DEI is very irresponsible of him. I think because of that, people are going crazy about it on social media, calling Trump crazy, and then the people who are supporting Trump are also very much being like, thank God Trump got rid of DEI and all this federal funding for it and stuff like that, when I don't think people realize the different umbrellas that fall under DEI. It's not just about diversity within gender and race, but it's diversity within a bunch of different categories.
Yeah, to that point, I would say that like the DEI thing, there is a lawsuit that was filed in 2015 where someone was alleging that their application got thrown out and among 1,000, it was a class action suit among 1,000 applicants who said that they were discriminated against in the hiring at like I think it was the FAA.
The FAA.
And so like that has been a thing since 2015 where people are criticizing I guess they're calling it DEI of the FAA. However, on the other side of things, I can totally see that obviously they were short-staffed, right? Like you were saying, they should have had more people monitoring the airspace and they didn't. And so that kind of implies that they were short-staffed. And so that is another thing. Right now, they're cutting a lot of federal spending and even getting rid of a lot of federal employees. They just offered, I think, was it like an 8 month compensation if a lot of the federal employees like voluntarily decide to resign. And so the short-staffed issue seems like it's something that like Trump has been advocating to cut a lot of employees, and they've been advocating to kind of like downsize these different agencies and departments. And that seems equally, if not more likely to me than anything having to do with DEI as to why the situation happened when it happened. And it's also just a very like vulnerable time with the rollover from one administration to the next. You have very new people in these offices, like the Secretary of Transportation, for instance. And I think that they've handled it pretty well in terms of like the public messaging and launching all these investigations, but it's still it still could have opened up liability for all of this bad stuff to happen right at this time.
Yes, the mentioning of the transition of power, I think, is super relevant too, because I think about transitional moments like this one, and it's hard to talk about it on such a bigger scale too, because obviously there's so much weight and power within these roles that in transitional times and in times where they have to learn new things and get used to things, there's not really much wiggle room for mistake. And outside of outside of this tragedy too, it's also like when somebody first starts a role in such a huge position, that also leaves so much room for criticism, and they have to be so perfect at once. And for me too, as just like a layperson, like enjoying my life, like I think it's really hard for me to kind of imagine myself in those shoes and also think to myself, okay, wait, maybe I should give these people grace because like they need to know everything and they need to be qualified for everything. But yeah, that was just a mini little side tangent about that as well.
Yeah, well, not even speaking to like Sean Duffy in particular, but just all of the cabinet positions and all the confirmation hearings that we've been talking about for these various different people, it does show you why these selections are actually important because they are overseeing such large operations. They really have to have it all together. And so I'm troubled by the fact that not just this one crash happened in DC, but then you had another airplane crash in Philadelphia. I think it was Friday, and it was a bit of a different story where this plane was like a med evac plane. It was carrying 7 passengers, and they were all from Mexico, but they were flying back to Tijuana actually, and this plane crashed, and it was a huge like fireball explosion, injured a lot of people on the ground in Philadelphia. So, did you see some of the videos coming out of that?
No, but honestly, I again want to say that I try to avoid videos like that just because I'm very like superstitious, squeamish about that. But what was it? What happened in the videos?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot more close up video because they crashed into like a residential, they crashed onto a street actually. And, the other plane that went down landed in the river, and so it kind of minimized any of the damage to like houses and people. But this one went down into the road, so it hurt a lot of people on the ground. I think 19 was the last I saw. And it's just this huge explosion. And again, it's like people are trying to understand why is this suddenly a thing that's happening? I mean, we've had plane crashes before, but two like these are some of the bigger ones in recent memory, and they just happen so close to one another in time. So it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around all of it.
And I think that there was an FAA report in the New York Times, right, about how near misses are more and more common throughout the country. Is that right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I totally have seen a lot of different outlets reporting that. I even remember because I'm like a nervous flyer, I've picked up on and like been following this for several months, if not a couple of years now. I've seen that headline over and over. Even like when we were living in San Diego, I remember there was like near misses every felt like every well, they would report on it every couple months, but the report would say like this is like a routine thing that happens where, you know, the runway is just
Actually,
not cleared or something bizarre.
yes. I actually remember just like this is a kind of a personal story, but around a year ago and a week ago, Colin and I were in Buenos Aires together, and I specifically remember Colin and I were on the balcony of the hotel room that I was staying in, and we had a conversation about plane crashes, actually. I don't remember if you remember, or I don't know if you remember this, but you had said something so similar that you just said just now to me, which I
Huh.
think is crazy. Like that was a year ago, but
I honestly don't remember the exact. I remember other things from the conversation, but not that particular part. But that is interesting.
is
Hmm.
there anything else that you wanted to touch on for this topic?
No, I think that kind of sums it up. I was just gonna say that I listened to the Daily's podcast about this plane crash, and it kind of struck me the wrong way. I felt like the tone of it was kind of off. So I just wanted, since we've been on this kind of kick of like talking about legacy media and the way that they report on things. I just thought that it was a not amazing report that they did. They were giving like the factual information of it, but I thought that the way that they were running through it was kind of a little cavalier, and it was a bit of like between the word choice and the intonations, and I felt like she was kind of even like using this like Valley Girl accent, and it was not sitting right with me. So I don't know. I wanted to just like put that out there because again, we've been talking about the way that media covers things, and I think that sometimes like reporters can get a little bit numb to the reality of these events, especially I don't know. Maybe this story just kind of like hit close to home, and it really got me in like in a different way. That when I heard their reporting on it, I felt like it didn't meet the bar, I could say.
No, and I think that's totally a valid opinion. I listened to it shortly after you did, I think, because Colin, for the viewers, Colin had texted me to if I had the chance to listen to the daily episode. I agree. I didn't like the tone of it either. To your point about reporters becoming desensitized to things, I think that the sign of a truly great reporter is honestly keeping that human connection to that. I'm going to call back this experience within the Vista again. I feel like we're always referencing it. But I actually remember when I was interviewing for news editor, the editor-in-chief who was interviewing me at the time, our mutual friend, had asked me a question about when the news gets hard and when it's a lot, how are you going to ground yourself and how are you going to not be sad all the time, which is basically what she had asked me, because when it comes to these topics, it really is hard to keep your emotions out of it, but also keep that same like human touch that people want to see, which is another reason why I think independent media might be rising too, because it doesn't have to be devoid of human emotion. It doesn't have to be just straight facts. It has a lot to do with your tone and how much, how passionate you feel, how passionately you feel about certain topics too.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And I don't have anything else to add. I think that really sums it up. So we can move on to our next topic if you want. We have Colombia's president, the country, not the university, Gustavo Petro, and he
Mhm.
was having a bit of a back and forth earlier this week with Trump because Trump was sending two planes with migrants from the US, Colombian residents. He was sending them back to Colombia, and they got essentially denied permission to land and had to send them back to the US temporarily. So, yeah, I don't know if you saw that whole like feud that they were going through on it was on social media. I think it was on Truth and on X, but did you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I didn't see it on social media, particularly on those apps, because I don't have either of those apps right now.
I live in the West.
Yeah. Um, but I think that the outright rejections of the planes landing and especially if certain agreements had been taken place before causes this tension that might not be necessary and could honestly stifle future cooperation with other countries in foreign affairs. I think that these issues are super important, like, right, like trade and security, and to outright reject it was probably not the best decision.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of raising this thing about diplomacy being conducted over social media, and I think that was something that Trump liked to do in his first administration. And I think I don't have any too big criticisms of how his foreign policy has historically been. I actually tend to think that's one of the areas that I agree with him a lot. But I would say that in this particular case, he was threatening to impose like retaliatory tariffs. And, we're gonna get into that later eventually, where he just also imposed like 25% tariff on Canada and, Mexico. But I don't know. I just think that it's effective in one way, but also it feels a little bit it's a definitely departure from the norm of how these things are generally handled.
There's a certain sense of unprofessionalism that comes from two leaders like arguing on social media, in my opinion. I can't imagine I'm comparing it to, I always compare things to our college community just because we're so freshly out of it. But I cannot imagine, say, like the president of our college and somebody else, a different president of a different college, arguing on like fizz or something. Do you know what I'm saying? Something so accessible to the whole crowd without any type of, I guess, like deliberation or anything like that on a different platform or like media or interviews or something like that that is maybe seen as more professional and more of a place that is reliable for information, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a strange dynamic online as well. The president of Colombia actually they were trading, messages back and forth publicly, but the president of Colombia got into this really kind of long-winded, poetic post and was just like really going off on Trump, and it also kind of felt very unprofessional in its own way. I know he was like obviously responding and reacting to the whatever Trump was lobbing at him, and Trump knows his audience and he knows like this is gonna go over really well with supporters and people on the internet. But I thought the Colombia's president, his post was also kind of strange. He went on this kind of like long rant about how like Colombia is the heart of the world, and like he went into like Sacco and Vanzetti from like the early 1900s in the US, and he was talking about, I think he said I wouldn't shake hands with a white slaver, like referring to Trump. So again, it's just like hurling insults and like pettiness, and it didn't really seem to accomplish anything, at least not for Colombia, because eventually they did accept the migrant planes back
Mhm.
after, Trump threatened these really steep tariffs.
Also, we have to think about the trickle down of when you have leaders like this. Like, your leaders are supposed to reflect how you're supposed to act, in my opinion. Like, I think it's so important for leaders to have good character and also good interactions with one another and interactions that are able to be mimicked by the broader population. In theory, that's how it should be.
Yeah, well, I think like ideally with any time you have representatives of the population, like the way that they conduct themselves would be fairly like representative of how everyone
Yeah.
is really, what they would like to see in the world. But that's not always how it works.
Right.
Um,
Let's move on to our next topic. Trump recently signed his first legislation act, the Lake and Riley Act. I think I'm pronouncing her name right. But some background on this act that was signed on, was it January 29th, I'm pretty sure, is an act about immigration enforcement policies. And some background on this is that it's honoring Lake and Riley, who was a Georgia nursing student who was murdered by a Venezuelan immigrant. Um, and prior to that prior to her murder, the Venezuelan immigrant was arrested for some smaller crimes, like I think it was theft, and had another previous charge in a different city as well. And this new act that Trump signed basically is saying that if immigrants commit these crimes, minor or major, that they have to be detained by ICE and convicted of these crimes, even within the sanctuary states as well. Another part of it is that states can sue the federal government if they feel that there wasn't the right deliberation within that as well. And yeah, that's just like a little bit of a rundown. Colin, do you have anything to add or anything that I might have missed from that?
No, that sounds right. I think that this is a bit of a departure from the Biden administration in that previously there were instances of people being arrested for, like you said, minor crimes and being allowed back onto the street. And this would kind of get immigration services like more involved so that they're tracking and detaining and deporting people arrested. And Trump has a really interesting way of approaching immigration compared to Biden, where they're not really like making as much of a distinction between um, like immigrants versus uh, like immigrants who have been convicted of crimes under Trump's policy. And this is what his press secretary said in like one of her first briefings. Essentially, all of immigrants who cross the border illegally are considered a criminal under Trump's administration. And so when they're arrested for these minor crimes, they're already under that umbrella, essentially. And so that's like grounds enough for their deportation. Whereas, again, that wasn't necessarily happening under Biden quite as much. So yeah, what do you think about that distinction? Is it something that I don't know, how do you feel about it?
I think that it's, again, when we talk about transitional times, it's definitely different, right? I think it's interesting because definitely Trump has followed through with everything that he has been saying that he was going to do. I think there are issues with maybe due process within these things and due process when it comes to these violations and the expansion of the detention policies within that. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, we would be contributing more money to this as well, right? Within like financial burden too.
Yeah, I don't know the exact financial amounts, but I mean the cost of detention and deportation is more, I would assume. Um, and I know that like we mentioned last week, the deportations have definitely been ratcheting up. We saw as of Tuesday of this week, there had been between 3,500 and 5,000 deportations already carried out. So that's a bit of a departure again from the Biden administration, where their policies were just a bit more lenient in all of these different ways we just discussed. And Tom Homan is the new border czar who's in charge of all these deportations and everything. He said that there's over 600,000 illegal immigrants in the US who also have a criminal conviction. So, it's kind of hard to put numbers on all of these things because people are getting across the border oftentimes secretly. So any estimates about the exact number is an estimate. But apparently that was the number that he gave for the number who had crossed illegally and then committed another crime. And so yeah, I mean, it sounds like the administration plans to prioritize tracking and deporting that group of people as opposed to just, they've said mass deportations, but for right now, they claim that they're focused on those 600,000.
Okay. I want to kind of talk about how definitely this act in particular is such a sensitive one too. I don't want to say anything about Lake and Riley and her family as well, just because it's unfortunate that on both sides of the political spectrum, people are kind of using her story to maybe cause fire within the other side. Um, it obviously was something so tragic that happened to her. And I don't want it to seem like I'm dismissing what happened to her as well. I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah. I mean, she was probably around our age, and as we were talking about, like being mindful about the ways that tragedies are sort of used as part of a narrative is really important, something that we're trying to do on this show. I do think that her family was pretty on board and touched by like the gestures that Trump has
Yeah.
done toward them. I think that he actually gave the pen that he used to sign the executive order to her mom. And so from that standpoint, um, it seems like her family is relatively on board with this act and sees it as a positive thing, even though it comes out of this tragedy. Um, yeah, and as far as how it's going to actually impact immigration, it'll probably, yeah, there will be more deportations that we'll see, as we've already seen.
Yes, and we'll keep seeing most likely as well. Do you have anything else about this topic that you want to touch on before we move on?
Well, I know, so there was a video on Monday of Selena Gomez that she posted that was getting a lot of heat, like speaking of how these issues become very politicized and intense and people kind of pile on each other. So she posted a video, I think on Instagram, where she has, I think, over 400 million followers, and she was getting, it was her crying and saying how she felt very helpless to do anything in this situation, like watching these deportations happen, as we've all kind of been seeing. And she was pretty mocked, I would say, for posting it, especially by the right. And Candace Owens was really going after her on her podcast. So I know we both felt some things about it. Did you have any insights on what you thought?
I think that she definitely has the right to be upset. I think she definitely, I know she's half Mexican, and so when people say, "Oh, Selena doesn't have any connection to this at all," I don't think that's valid. I think she, even if you're not, I feel like you're allowed to be upset. But saying that, I also think that her getting online and just crying just comes off as, to me, strange and a bit just out of touch. I don't know how to explain it other than that. I I'm a Selena Gomez fan. I like her and I like her music for the most part. I like her better as an actor. Anyway, but her getting on and crying and saying that she doesn't know what to do and all this stuff and all these people commenting about how horrible they feel for her, for her. Everything's about her within the comments, and I just don't think it's very helpful in that moment. And I know we talked about it, so
Yeah. I mean, the word that comes to mind from everything you just said is sort of performative because it's not really moving the conversation forward in any really meaningful way. I think sometimes that there is value in emoting, and even doing that in a public way can help to validate other people who are also maybe feeling overwhelmed or, confused and scared. It can be validating, but also I mean, just the video that when I saw it, I felt like it was over the top a bit, felt performative. And something that we talked about too was the effort that it takes to, like pull out your phone in the middle of crying and record yourself, and all that we've talked about celebrities and how their images are very curated. It just seems unlikely to me that it was completely authentic.
Mhm.
And even like, after she had recorded herself, then there's a lot of effort that must have gone on in terms of like presenting it. And I don't know if they did any like pre-post production on this, but it wouldn't shock me just knowing what we know about PR. Everything is like run past someone. So from that standpoint, it did seem a bit performative to me, and it kind of got us talking a bit about celebrities in general and their images and the things that they'll do that might not always help situations.
Yes, I think this also ties into everything that we've been talking about in terms of PR and the Justin Baldoni versus Blake Lively cases and um, everything that has to do with how many people are behind one person's brand. Colin, when you were talking about not knowing if there's like pre or post production work with this video of Selena Gomez crying, I totally agree. It's it within this field and working within the media and having to research all these things, I feel like these days I trust people in Hollywood less and less and less. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't listen to their music and don't enjoy their entertainment because I do. I sit here and I watch TV sometimes, or I'll tune into things like the Grammys or Oscars. Not tonight, though. We're recording that podcast right during the Grammys. But I don't want to sit here and say that I'm done with Hollywood, but I do want to say that I think people are critiquing celebrities more and more and recognizing that they, as people, are still a brand and a corporation as well. And because of that, people are feeling more open to openly dislike them, openly talk about them, and kind of bring that into light within this conversation as well.
It's interesting too how I think celebrities and influencers know that authenticity and being natural is very like in vogue right now. So they they want to like have this appearance of being really authentic, but the lengths that they go through in order to seem authentic are by like definition inauthentic because they're presenting it in a certain way. And like anytime that they have to go and like I always think about people like dancing in public and how that's just I just find it like objectively odd, you know, like for someone to go through the effort of like setting up the camera, getting the angle, learning the dance, performing the dance, and like everyone's just like walking past them and like there's no way to make that natural because it's not. But there's such an emphasis on like trying to appear somehow like just this authentically like fun person. To me, I've never really bought it whenever I see it, whether it's an Instagram post or like I said, like a dancing video or something.
When it comes to influencers, I'm thinking about when the TikTok ban happened. There was this trend. Colin, I know you don't have TikTok. Every time we mention TikTok, I'm always like, yeah, Colin doesn't have TikTok. But anyways, there was this trend going around where all these influencers were kind of revealing their secrets, basically. And it was funny to a point. I thought it was a bit dystopian and super inauthentic when they started talking about like how they faked workouts or how the products that they advertised that they didn't actually use and they just wanted commission, or about how they lied to the public about their certain skincare, or just these very specific weird things to do when as a normal person. And also there was one influencer who I forgot who it was, but she posted something and then the caption was like, "How did you guys not know it was fake? Like, duh, it was fake." I'm like, "No, I had no idea it was fake." I'm thinking about like the normal people, these young people who are following these routines, doing and eating these things and buying these products, and they're like, "Why don't I look like that? Why is my life not like that?" And it's because it's all curated and it just seems so like there's something just like dark and twisted about that to me.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't really I see people kind of waking up to it and being a little bit more skeptical, and that makes me happy. I mean, I feel like you and I both really value skepticism, and we try to incorporate that into our own analysis of the media and all this. So when I see other people doing similarly, it's encouraging to me. But then I think about this is a whole nother like rabbit hole we don't have to go down, but like AI and how that's going to be changing things. And you just can't take anything really at face value anymore, it feels like. And that's a little bit sad. I wish that we did live in a world where you didn't have to be like guarded against and assume that things are manipulated somehow.
And to that point, if any of our viewers or subscribers feel that we are being inauthentic or have any criticisms about that, please call it out. I fear that one day I won't be able to see that within myself. So if anyone has any criticisms about that, please comment.
Yeah, we love skepticism and we encourage everyone to practice it. Do you have any tips on just like viewing the world through that more skeptical lens? Like anything that you do that helps you, like media literacy and stuff like that? Because I know that that's really important to you.
Yeah, I think every person that I follow, I kind of just assume, like celebrities, influencers, not regular people. I kind of just assume that everything is curated and everything has an underlying message or a reason for their branding, right? Okay, for example, a celebrity that I really, really enjoy, an influencer that I honestly keep up with a lot is Emma Chamberlain. I have talked about her so much recently for some reason. But even her, her brand was built on relatability and all this stuff. But now she's so popular. She's not the average girl anymore. So everything that she does, I still am looking at it and I'm like, why did she do this? And that doesn't take away from people's character. I don't want to say that like every single person in this realm is horrible or evil or whatever, because I don't think that. I think that we're able to critique people and not take them down as people as well. Like not critique them to the point where they get canceled because again, I don't agree with that. I think these things are so nuanced and just because somebody's doing something for their brand doesn't mean that they also don't believe in it, but you have to just think about it from the business perspective and the person perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like one of the best also ways to protect yourself against it is like just in our like limited role in learning how to market and like when we were at the paper, like learning how to present stuff and for like an audience, by practicing that, you also see through how other people do it too. And so it kind of like demystifies it a little bit. So I would encourage like anyone to, well, like join student media, see how a paper sort of does it and handles this and handles their own image and content. And then it'll give you some more insight into, how other people are doing that for themselves. So,
Totally.
that's all that I have about celebrities for right now,
Me
but
too.
we can go on. I think there was like a trial date set for the Baldoni versus Justin, or sorry, Justin Baldoni versus Blake. I think it's set for like March. So we can punt some of our other comments about that till when that's taking place.
Yes, there's updates on that nearly every day. I don't want this podcast to turn into a Justin versus Blake thing because if you want to tune into that, just go listen to Candace Owens.
Pretty
She's
much.
doing a great job at that. But yeah, we can move on to our next topic. What are we talking about next, Colin?
We're talking about the confirmation hearings that were last week, specifically for RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Kash Patel. As
Mhm.
I mentioned, I tried to go see the RFK one in person, and there was not room. They were gonna like put me in the overflow room with a bunch of other people, and I was just like, I'll just watch this later. Um, and so essentially, with RFK, it wasn't really that heated. I thought it would be a lot more intense, but he definitely got into it with, in particular, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. With Warren, she was asking him about him taking or getting money from being in like an ad campaign for this law firm, trying to advertise like if you've been injured, we'll like sue and get you what you deserve. And so she was bringing up, and she was saying like, would you do this after? She said in your role as secretary or after your role for like 4 years, and he said he wouldn't do it as secretary, but he couldn't like say for after. So she was just like really drilling in on this. I don't know if you saw, did you see any clips from RFK's?
I didn't see any clips. I was all listening to it through audio because I listen to it during my job sometimes. But yeah, this exchange stood out to me too. It was definitely a heated one, and
He was
I
yelling for sure.
I think it's important to emphasize that people within the public eye and public officials, our representatives, should definitely not um, gain any financial gain for themselves. So I think that I liked that Elizabeth Warren called that out. I'll say that.
I thought it was like an interesting line of questioning, but she wouldn't like leave it alone. I felt like she was prying at it and like wanting it to go somewhere, but it didn't land really. So as far as like the effectiveness of it, again, my skepticism of all of these congressional hearings is higher than it's ever been after the past few weeks because, like I said, I've been seeing it as more of like an opportunity for the Congress people to get a soundbite out of it. Again,
Hmm.
performative in its own way. So I don't know. That was my take on a lot of it.
I totally agree with that. The soundbite thing, I have also been thinking about more and more, especially with
With the reels.
The Bernie Sanders onesie comment. I, you guys, I was actually at my desk just doing some busy work, and I giggled out loud when I heard that one. I thought that was a little ridiculous, um, and kind of stupid. I was like, why is Bernie talking about this right now? It really just made him sound a little crazy to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was trying to have like this gotcha moment,
Yeah.
and it just wasn't. Yeah, those are hard because it can really fall flat if it doesn't like have the impact. And so he like brought out this big poster board of the onesie, and he was like, "This was an organization that you helped to start, and you were a part of it." And RFK was just like, "I'm not part of that organization anymore." Like, it was so nonchalant that Bernie like shouting him down really fell flat and just made him look kind of like, I don't know, a little bit.
It made Bernie look crazy. And I feel like I like some of Bernie's things. Like, I don't know. I thought that Bernie trying to get him in a gotcha moment honestly made him look bad. It backfired on him completely, in my opinion.
Yeah, a bit. So that those were, I mean, they really were drilling RFK on like his stance on vaccines as well. He has obviously been called an anti-vaxxer. He's expressed a lot of like anti, I don't know how to phrase this exactly. I feel like he's expressed anti-vax sympathies, is the best way I can explain. He's been on all these different podcasts for the last 2 years. When COVID was happening, he was very against, like vax mandates. And it's weird because even within like that camp of people who oppose vax mandates, there's people who oppose it on the grounds of like the vaccines are unsafe, and then there's people who oppose it on the grounds of I don't like mandates. So like for me, I sympathize with RFK because I don't like mandates, but it's not necessarily that I'm like anti-vax, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah. And also since COVID happening and within this hearing as well, I could hear RFK kind of more modernizing or um centering himself on the issue too when it comes to vaccines particularly. Um yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean when they're in these hearings, they're kind of in a tough place because they have all of
To
these past.
appeal everyone.
Yeah, they have to like answer for all of their past statements, and whether or not they still believe that now is unclear, but they kind of have to like play this game of like, I still believe what I believe, and I believe it with conviction, but at the same time, in this role, I'll promise to be like on my best behavior and I won't like mess anything up. So there's this weird tension to all of these hearings that I think is present. And it also is present in Kash Patel's hearing because he's made some past statements about the FBI, like saying that he wants to shut down the headquarters and turn it into a museum for the deep state.
I saw that.
He said that on a podcast in last September, I believe. So this was like only a few months ago. And there was one congressperson who really hit him with that comment. I forget what he responded though.
Yeah, I definitely think that the FBI needs to be like still a very nonpartisan agency. Um, Cat Patel is very aligned with Trump, very obviously. So I think it'll be interesting to see where his hearing goes too with that. And um, definitely the left side, the Democrats, will need to kind of settle with that fact too. And he needs to be more of a neutral person if he's going to keep the FBI as that nonpartisan agency that needs to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I thought both Patel and RFK conducted themselves pretty well for all things considered. And, they don't, I feel like they don't really directly answer to the question put to them by the senator, but they can kind of like sidestep it and give this like non-committal, I changed my view,
Right, that's their PR training.
Yeah, I guess. And both of them are lawyers, I think, so that
Yeah.
helps. But do you think that those two will be confirmed, most likely?
Not sure about Cash, but I think that RFK will be confirmed.
I was kind of having the opposite. I feel like RFK is a little bit more precarious because you had Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, who's a Republican, but he was kind of a holdout over whether or not he was on board. Because I'm pretty sure Cassidy is a doctor, and he really didn't like some of RFK's past statements about vaccines. And
Mhm.
so that was sort of, he was a holdout basically, and they're trying to like bring him on board to support RFK, but last I heard it was still kind of open-ended whether he would vote yes or no. So I could see, I think both of them will be confirmed, but that one was
More of
stuck out to me.
Yeah, I'm speaking of other controversial confirmation hearings, Tulsi Gabbard is definitely more of a wild card than both of them. If anything, I feel that if one of the three isn't confirmed, it definitely would be her.
I agree, yeah. Yeah, I like her. I mean, she ran for president in 2020 against Biden and Harris at the time, and several other candidates. I thought she was great back then. She was kind of responsible for taking Harris out of that race because she was questioning Kamala's prosecution, her record as a prosecutor, saying like you put a bunch of people in jail for minor drug charges. And that was it kind of was a gotcha moment on the debate stage. So that was like Tulsi's big moment during that campaign. And ever since then, she's been more sympathetic to like Republican issues and eventually left the Democratic Party, joined Republican, joined Trump, and then here we are. So did you follow like her progression at all?
No, I listened to um a podcast with her in it talking about kind of her journey turning from switching sides and talking about kind of her opinions on things like that. But I didn't really do my huge research on her. So, what other opinions do you have about that?
Um, I would say like I would if she had been running and if she had made the nomination in 2020 or if she had run in 24, I definitely would have liked her better than any of the options for those elections, and I would have voted for her. Um, but she has this background she's in the National Guard. But she's now up for director of national intelligence. Um, and so anyway, so people are criticizing her like lack of experience in intelligence, even though she's from the military. She was a congressperson from Hawaii as well. So I don't know. I think that she's very competent and that she conducts herself very well. So I'm not really worried about her being able to handle the role. The biggest thing that came up in the hearings against her was that she wouldn't say that Edward Snowden from the NSA was a traitor.
Yeah, I saw that too.
He had, leaked information about the NSA's operations back in like 2013, 14, I want to say. And so she was asked directly by Michael Bennett of Colorado, was Snowden a traitor? And she again kind of gave the sidestep answer that was like Snowden broke the law, is what she was repeating. but she wouldn't use the word traitor. So what do you think about that?
think she was, again, like what we were just talking about, how with these hearings, people have to kind of appeal to the masses, and I think she's teetering that line with this answer too, and avoiding the outright label of Snowden as a traitor. Like, I think that she was trying to avoid the isolation of people who are advocating for civil liberties while also like not completely um breaking her stance within the intelligence community.
Yeah, I totally agree. And do you think you said you don't know whether she'll be confirmed just because of it seemed like the Republicans were breaking from her even more so than the Democrats because historically the Republicans are the security people.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. I don't know about her. She's definitely a wild card. Did not expect that one.
Okay, so do you want to move on to some bonus topics this week?
Yes. What is our first bonus topic?
So we touched on it a bit already, social media diplomacy and talking about how there's this big conversation going on about like Greenland, but then now about the Panama Canal and how Marco Rubio is going down to Panama to see what he can do to get the US, I guess, maybe back in control of the Panama Canal. Did you hear about that at all?
Yeah, I read some headlines about it. Didn't what social media was it done over? Do you remember?
I don't know. I just know he's very like savvy in his posts. I don't know that he was necessarily doing negotiations over social media like Trump is known to do, but he was making the rounds for sure in the media and doing pretty I mean he was doing pretty effective work, speaking on behalf of Trump, at least representing the policy, but it's a definitely a reach. Like we gave or Jimmy Carter gave the Panama Canal back to Panama in the 70s or so. So like now for us to claim like we need it back for national security reasons, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I again kind of what we were saying earlier, I think that it would be unfortunate to isolate the US from our the rest of the world. I think that the this in reclaiming something like that wouldn't be powerful, more so it would seem like we're isolating ourselves. Like I don't think that's good.
And to add to that, our other bonus topic was the tariffs and how Trump basically just started a trade war with our two neighbors, Canada and Mexico. And this happened really recently, so I don't know too much about it, but it seems like he's putting a 25% tariff on all, imports, exports, or whatever from Canada and probably Mexico. And what do you think about that?
I'm definitely against that. I also, since it happened so recently, I haven't gotten to dive into it more when I'm sure that this week more will come out about that too, and especially the deliberation between the leaders. I'm sure we'll be able to see that and maybe even touch on it more last week. But yeah, I don't it again, I think it's super unfortunate that Trump is doing this, and this admin is alienating the US, especially against our two neighbors, Mexico and Canada.
And people have pointed out like tariffs tend to hurt everyday people more,
Mm,
like people who actually have to pay for the, groceries and things that they need. And so it's really easy for politicians to kind of just like slap tariffs around, especially as like a leverage thing. But at the end of the day, it kind of comes back to the consumer. So that's my stance on it personally.
yeah, hopping onto that too. On social media, I've been seeing like so many videos and freakouts of people going to the grocery store. And I don't know if you've seen any posts about this, but I literally saw this video of people with these cartons and cartons and cartons of eggs, like at Costco, just a huge, like Costco. I forgot what these are called, like rolly carts of like stacks and stacks of eggs and huge lines at the grocery stores and all these people talking about like the tariffs and stuff like that and having to stock up. And again,
Eggs
that
don't really last that long. I don't know
I
what they're.
know, okay, I need to send you this after we're done recording, but
I did have a
I
roommate in college who tried freezing eggs and it did not work, but
yeah, I remember being like, why are these people buying things that aren't even gonna last that long? It just seemed weird to me, but also you can see the effects of the public freakouts from this alone.
yeah, for sure. And there's some talk about like Mexico and Canada teaming up against us. Like we kind of put ourselves in a position to be triangulated against where like, like they have a stronger alliance against us, and then we probably have the economic power to withstand that, but it definitely is going to hurt consumers for sure, depending on how long this actually keeps going, or
Right.
escalating.
Right. And that just goes back to the whole like power isolation over cooperation and having allies. We're kind of wrapping up with time here.
Mhm.
Do you have anything else to say about this topic?
Not about this. I guess we could just leave it off with some good news this week because we've been talking about the LA fires for since the beginning of the year. And there was a headline that I saw from the New York Times that the fires are 100% contained. So that's really good news. I did see the death toll had risen to 29 and the property damage was over 250 billion. But the good news is it's on a better path now.
Yes. I'm glad we could end on some good news. Okay. Um, thanks
Yeah.
everyone for tuning in this week.
See you next week.
Okay, washed up out.